Before the first light of dawn could pierce through the stained-glass dome, Thomas Gray was already on the grounds of St. Alaric Academy, pushing his cleaning cart through the long, silent corridors. At the age of 58, with silver-white hair and a somewhat slow gait, he was always the first to arrive at school and often the last to leave. Once a renowned theoretical physicist, he was now merely a janitor, quietly dressed in a faded light blue uniform. St. Alaric was the most prestigious private high school in the state, a place where elite families sent their children as a stepping stone to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale. The school was filled with bronze statues, ancient libraries, and classrooms lined with ebony wood imported from Europe. There was no room there for those who had stumbled, much less for those who had been forgotten. No one greeted Thomas. The young teachers hurried past him, and a few nodded vaguely, as if to an automatic door. He didn't mind. Perhaps he was used to it. Or maybe the pain had dulled to the point of numbness. Instead, he focused on his work, cleaning the statues of honor students, polishing the wall inscribed with the names of benefactors, and often pausing for a few minutes in front of the physics lab, where a few equations he once wrote still remained, remnants of a life before it all fell apart. None of the students knew he had once been a professor at MIT, had lectured at the Nobel Symposium, and had been one of the youngest ever nominated for the Fields Medal. But one mistake, or more precisely, a betrayal by jealous colleagues, had cost him everything. His reputation, his academic position, and his faith in people. At exactly 8:10 a.m., as students began to flood into the school, Thomas quietly withdrew into the library, where he was in charge of dusting shelves and cleaning off cobwebs. He cherished these moments, when he could sit among thousands of books and touch knowledge, an old friend that never betrayed him. He was gently dusting off a copy of Fourier series Theory in Dynamic Systems, when a voice rang out behind him. "Do you actually understand that stuff?" Thomas turned around. It was Jordan Beck, a senior, known for his intelligence and quiet nature. His eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than the usual mockery Thomas had come to expect. "Hello, Beck. I was just making sure the book's still intact," he replied, his voice deep but warm. Jordan's eyes stayed fixed on the book. "We've got a paper due on this topic, but Mr. Johnson explains it like everyone's already Einstein." Thomas chuckled softly. "Need some help?" Jordan raised his eyebrows. "Seriously? I mean, do you actually know it?" Thomas didn't respond. Instead, he walked over to the reading table, picked up a sheet of paper, and began to write. His hand moved with surprising agility, producing clear, elegant mathematical notation that made Jordan's jaw drop. In less than 5 minutes, he had solved the first part of a problem the entire class had been struggling with for a week. As Jordan stared at the solution, his eyes lit up. But before he could speak, the library door swung open. Mr. Johnson, the senior physics teacher, entered with a few students. He frowned when he saw Thomas standing by the desk with a student. "What are you doing here?" "Teaching." His voice laced with disdain and suspicion. Jordan spoke up. "Mr. Gray just solved the first part of our assignment. He's actually a genius." Other students pulled out their phones, recording the sheet filled with symbols. One of them blurted out, "Mr. Johnson hasn't even covered this part yet." Thomas smiled faintly, not looking up. "I'm just dusting," he said evenly. "But knowledge, you can't sweep that out of someone's mind." Johnson flushed red. He stepped forward, examined the paper closely, and fell silent. That's how the arrogant become quiet, when outshone. And that was the day people began whispering about the gatekeeper of knowledge, the silent man buried by academia, now quietly reviving its true essence. From that day on, students began greeting Mr. Gray. Some stopped to ask questions, others sought his help with difficult lessons. And each morning, Thomas still walked the halls with his familiar mop, but now, his eyes shone a little brighter, not because fame had returned, but because he knew, light never truly disappears, as long as someone dares to kindle it again. Late in the morning, as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows along the third-floor corridor, Marcus Hale was carefully mopping the floor just outside the advanced physics classroom. Each sweep of his mop was precise and quiet, as if he were playing a delicate instrument. Tall and slender, his back slightly stooped with age, Marcus's eyes remained sharp and observant, as though he were always watching from an invisible distance. That was when the sharp voice of Mr. Harold Denton, the notoriously strict physics teacher known as the King of Cold Standards, at Wellington Prep, rang out from behind the slightly open classroom door. His tone was icy, full of disdain, slicing through the hallway like a blade through air. "Mr. Ramirez, I see you've been spending quite a bit of time on the football field. Perhaps if you invested as much effort into studying, you wouldn't be confusing electromagnetic equations like a middle schooler." Marcus paused mid-step, the mop frozen in place like time itself had stopped. "I'm sorry, Mr. Denton. I tried." "Trying without understanding is just wasted effort," Denton cut him off. "Your solution is an insult to modern physics. It's like trying to build a space shuttle with tin foil and duct tape." A few snickers echoed from inside the classroom, a sound Marcus had heard hundreds of times before. Same laughter. Same scene. Only this time, it was aimed at Mateo Ramirez, a scholarship student from the poor South Side neighborhood, someone Marcus had noticed a few times, not for his appearance, but for his gaze. A cautious, guarded gaze, as if he were constantly measuring the distance between himself and the world around him. Mateo was tall and built like an athlete, but always kept his head down as he walked the halls. He didn't belong in these ornate corridors, where student names were etched in gold, and the children of lawyers, doctors, and CEOs had generations of academic legacy behind them. The bell rang, shrill and sudden, and students spilled out like water breaking through a dam. As usual, Marcus stepped aside, invisible and silent. The chatter buzzed around him. Denton totally destroyed Ramirez. Come on, not everyone's had a private tutor since 3rd grade. Marcus saw Mateo emerge last, his shoulders slumped, walking slowly. The boy quietly made his way to the drinking fountain at the hallway's corner, one hand absently clutching the strap of his backpack. He bent to take a sip, but froze when he saw the whiteboard outside the science club room. Scrawled across it was a complicated electrodynamics problem, filled with vector notation and time derivatives. Mateo stood still, eyes locked on it, brow furrowed. One glance was enough for Marcus to spot the mistake. In step 3, the writer had forgotten to switch coordinate systems when taking the derivative, a basic yet commonly overlooked error. He hesitated, then gently rolled his cart closer. "Excuse me," his voice was low and almost vanished into the air. Mateo turned around, slightly startled, then nodded. "Sorry, sir." "No problem," Marcus replied with a soft smile, bending to fill his bucket with water. "The equation on the board, there's an error in step 3. Mateo looked back at the board, then at him. "I thought something felt off, but I couldn't figure it out." The writer forgot the frame shift. When you're taking the derivative of a vector in a non-inertial reference frame, you have to add the rotational derivative. Mateo's eyes widened. He looked at the board again, then erased the mistake and rewrote the step according to Marcus's suggestion. "So I need to use the relative velocity theorem," he murmured. "You know physics?" Marcus looked up at him, quiet for a moment, then answered. "I used to teach, before I started mopping floors." He paused, then added, soft as a breeze, "Not all academic paths are straight." Mateo stared at him, unblinking. Then he smiled, genuinely. "Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it." Marcus simply nodded and turned back to his cart. But as he began pushing it forward again, he heard the boy's voice, louder this time. "I'll come back and ask you more, if that's okay." Marcus stopped, glanced back briefly. "I'm always here before 8 a.m. And after 4 p.m. Then he turned away, leaving Mateo standing there, no longer just a student who had been humiliated, but someone newly empowered. And as Marcus moved through that hallway, he was no longer a silent fixture of the building, but an echo of buried knowledge, one that was, at last, beginning to be heard again. The teacher's lounge was always the place Thomas Gray least wanted to clean. Unlike the empty classrooms during break, where everything paused in quiet stillness, the lounge buzzed with laughter, gossip about students, lesson plans, and endless conversations. It was like a wave crashing each time the teachers came and went, a space where no one really paid attention to his presence, the janitor in the faded blue uniform, always working invisibly. Today, Thomas was late getting to the lounge due to a cafeteria mishap. A tray of food had spilled, leaving the floor a chaotic mess. So when he pushed his cleaning cart into the lounge during mid-morning break, a conversation between two teachers was already in full swing. "These scholarship kids really can't handle the pressure at Wellington," said Samuel Harper, the math teacher, his voice cold and even as he stirred his coffee in a white porcelain mug. Samuel was the type who always looked polished, his hair slicked back with gel, as though he had never worried about anything in his life. "Michael Carter is quite smart, though," English teacher Rachel Henderson offered, but her tone faltered slightly. "Smart, perhaps. But not up to standard," Samuel snorted. "He never keeps up with my classes. And I don't think it's because he lacks talent, it's because he comes from a place far too different from here." Thomas moved quietly to the sink, gently rinsing out the coffee mugs the teachers always seemed to think were too important to wash themselves. He said nothing, simply listening. "He scored very high on the entrance exam, at least," Rachel said, trying to defend her student. "Test scores don't mean much," Samuel dismissed. "Those are just prep-friendly exams. Real mathematics requires a different kind of thinking, the kind kids like him don't have." Thomas accidentally knocked two cups together, creating a loud clink that drew both teachers' attention. "Careful, Barnes. Some of us bring our personal mugs from home," Samuel said with disdain. "Sorry, Mr. Harper," Thomas replied, his voice low and calm. Samuel turned back to Rachel, lowering his voice, but not so much that Thomas couldn't hear. "Speaking of people who don't belong, I saw our janitor at the whiteboard yesterday, correcting a physics problem. Maybe I should hire him as a teaching assistant." Samuel let out a soft, mocking laugh. "You never know," Rachel replied, her voice more serious. "People can surprise you." "Certainly," Samuel said, thick with sarcasm. "Next thing you'll suggest I consult the lunch lady for investment advice." Thomas silently finished the dishes, maintaining his composed professionalism, then rolled his cart toward the door. As he was leaving, Samuel called after him. "Hey, Barnes, there's a coffee stain on the desk in the economics classroom. Make sure that's cleaned up, will you?" "Of course, Mr. Harper." Thomas turned back, knelt, and meticulously wiped the barely visible stain. He knew Samuel was watching, waiting for any flicker of frustration or pride. But Thomas showed nothing. He simply cleaned, diligently, precisely. Once finished, Thomas returned to his small maintenance room in the basement. Unlike the bright spaces upstairs, this room was simple and cramped. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, nothing remarkable, but it was the only place where he could truly be himself, not the janitor, but a man with deep thoughts and quiet dignity. He opened his lunch box and a worn paperback copy of A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. The book had been with him for years, its pages yellowed, the margins filled with neatly written notes in his hand. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled him. He quickly closed the book and tucked it beneath a pile of cleaning supplies. "Mr. Barnes," came the familiar voice of Lily Porter. Lily, the skinny but sharp-witted student, stood holding a small paper bag. "Sorry to bother you. I saw you reading in the library this morning, and I was wondering if maybe you could help me. I've got this physics problem that no one seems able to explain." Thomas looked at her, sensing the hesitation and uncertainty in her voice. "What's the problem, Miss Porter?" he asked gently. Lily hesitated a moment, then opened her notebook. "It's about quantum mechanics and probability. I think I'm missing something fundamental." Thomas glanced at the problem and immediately saw the issue. He smiled and said softly, "Let me help." For the next 10 minutes, Thomas guided Lily through the problem, not by giving her the answer, but by asking the right questions, leading her to discover the solution herself. When she finally reached the correct conclusion, her face lit up. "Now I get it. It all makes sense. You're amazing, how do you know all this?" Thomas smiled, handing the notebook back. "Life sometimes takes us on unexpected journeys." Lily looked at him for a moment, then asked hesitantly. "I heard, you used to be a teacher." Thomas stood, adjusting his janitor's shirt. "Students say a lot of things. Don't believe everything you hear." Lily packed up her things, and just before leaving, she turned back, eyes filled with gratitude. "Whatever the truth is, thank you so much." After she left, Thomas sat back down and retrieved the hidden book. The page lay open to a highlighted quote. "Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change." He gently traced the words with his finger before closing the book and returning to his work. Phones were drawn discreetly. No one laughed aloud, but everyone recognized this was a potentially viral moment. And that, precisely that, was the kind of situation Thomas Gray had avoided for the past 3 years. He should have turned away, returned to his cart, back into the familiar invisibility where no one expected anything from a janitor. But then came Mateo's eyes, awkward, angry, and above all, pleading. In that moment, Thomas saw his younger self, a fresh face standing before an academic panel, being tested not only by equations but by prejudice. Beside Mateo, Lily Porter watched silently. Her eyes were wide, not just with curiosity but with hope that someone would step up, that not all educated people remain silent in the face of injustice. Thomas exhaled softly and stepped forward. With calm, tinged with hesitation, he took the paper from Mr. Harper's hand. It was a complex proof question involving braided loops in non-Euclidean space, integrating complex variables and mixed derivatives, the sort of problem that could make a third-year college student sweat. "Well?" Samuel Harper arched an eyebrow, a cold smirk on his lips. "A little beyond your usual recreational math, isn't it?" The hallway fell into silence, as if someone had sliced the sound out of the air. Even the wind seemed to pause. Thomas looked Samuel in the eye, for the first time in years. "Mathematics is a rhythm," he said slowly. "The challenge isn't about difficulty. The challenge is whether you can hear it." From his pocket, he pulled out a ballpoint pen. Every eye followed the pen as it began to move across the page. The symbols flowed, curves, lines, elegant derivations, with a precision that seemed guided by compass and ruler drawn in the mind. Whispers began to swell as students around realized, the solution was forming. Not pieced together, not vague, a real solution. Clear, sharp, like someone composing a poem in the language of mathematics. In less than 3 minutes, Thomas stopped writing. He handed the paper back. "This may not be the shortest path," he said. "But it's clean." Samuel took it, his expression tightening as he read. His eyes darted across the page, searching for an error. But there was none. Every step was logical. Every symbol in context. Nothing to criticize. The air was thick with tension. Until... Clap. Clap. Slow applause echoed from the end of the hall. Everyone turned. Principal Morgan Langford stood there, her expression calm, but her eyes held something far deeper. "Mr. Harper," she said, "your next class begins in 5 minutes. And students, I believe you have places to be. This isn't a movie theater." The murmurs turned to groans of disappointment. Phones were quickly pocketed. A few students glanced at Thomas with new eyes, surprised, and respectful. Samuel returned the paper brusquely. "Must have been a lucky guess." "Maybe," Thomas replied evenly, slipping the paper into his pocket. Samuel leaned in, voice low. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'll find out." As Samuel walked away, Mateo stepped forward, still stunned. "Mr. Gray. I don't know what to say, how did you do that?" Thomas shook his head, turning back toward his cart. I should get back to work. Wait, Mateo said quickly. Could you help me after school? I really need to improve my grade to keep my scholarship. Thomas froze. That request, it was a door. A door he had locked long ago. Behind it were memories, wounds unhealed, and a fear of being pulled back into a world that once turned its back on him. But Mateo's eyes, diligent and pleading, made it impossible to say no. Library, after school, Thomas said, turning back to him. But keep it quiet. I don't want attention. Absolutely. I swear, Mateo replied, eyes glowing. Thank you. As Thomas pushed his cart down the back hallway, he could feel the stairs behind him. The whispers had begun. The man with the mop had solved the problem no one dared touch. The janitor was not just a janitor. By lunchtime, the video had already spread across the school's internal social network. In the teacher's lounge, murmurs stirred once more. Maybe he really did used to teach somewhere. I heard he was a university lecturer, fired for cheating. Or maybe for whistleblowing. Really? Then who's the guilty one? Thomas sat alone in the basement. In the cold maintenance room, he stared at his reflection in an old mirror, a gaunt face, weary lines, but the eyes were brighter. Knock knock. Another knock. He opened the door. Lily stood there, phone in hand. I found your papers, she said bluntly. The one on symmetry structures in Hilbert space. Published in 2001. And the advanced Fourier theory article. You're not just some ordinary janitor. Thomas said nothing. The storm he'd always feared was here. Why are you working here? Lily asked, direct but without judgment. You shouldn't have been buried like this. Thomas closed his eyes, voice low. Some stories are better left buried with time. Not when they can inspire others, Lily said, eyes steady. Thomas gave a faint shake of his head and closed the door gently. Leaning against the wall, he let out a deep sigh. Maybe, it was time to face it. Maybe the storm was truly coming. But this time, he wasn't sure he'd run from it. Even though he had mentally prepared for the curious stares and whispers, Thomas Gray could never have imagined the speed at which the video of him solving Mr. Harper's impossible math problem would spread. In just one night, he went from being invisible, the man who silently mopped the hallways each morning, to being the subject of every conversation at Wellington Academy. Students who used to pass him like a piece of furniture now paused to look. Some even greeted him, nodded, or smiled. Teachers, especially the younger ones, began treating him with more courtesy in the staff lounge. All of this attention made Thomas deeply uncomfortable. That's why, when Mateo appeared on Wednesday morning and found him wiping the east hallway windows, Thomas nearly turned and walked away. Mr. Gray, you're famous now, Mateo said, holding up his phone. Over 20,000 views. And that's just on the student page. Thomas paused, sighed. Fantastic, he muttered, his voice dry and clearly annoyed. You're a hero, Mateo grinned. Like David versus Goliath. Except with a ballpoint pen. I'm not interested in fighting anyone, Thomas replied, voice low. I just want to do my job without being noticed. But you could do so much more. You used to be a teacher, didn't you? Thomas set the cloth down on the window ledge. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have let myself get provoked. I should have kept my distance, like always. You're just going to act like nothing happened. Solve a problem even senior college students might fail at, and go back to mopping floors. Exactly. Mateo frowned. Why, Mr. Gray? What are you running from? Before Thomas could answer, Lily Porter rushed over, clutching her laptop tightly against her chest, her face both anxious and moved. I found it, she said, glancing at Thomas. About you. Thomas felt his stomach knot, as if someone had wrapped steel wire around his ribs. "Don't let me interrupt you," he said quickly, bending to gather his tools. "You should see this," Lily insisted, unmoving. "I'm not interested." "Maybe you should be," she said, opening the laptop. "Professor Thomas Gray," she read aloud. Ph.D. from MIT. Appointed professor at Caltech at age 33. Published over 20 papers in international journals. Recipient of the Lagrange Prize, 2003. Thomas kept his back to them, silent. "And nominated for the Fields Medal that year," Mateo added. "The Nobel of Mathematics. You were one of the best in the world." Thomas slowly turned, eyes weary. "Where did you find that?" "Academic journals. University digital libraries. But after 2004, nothing. You disappeared from the academic world. Why?" Thomas looked at both of them, saw the honesty in their eyes. But he only shook his head. "Some things are better left alone," he said. "I need to get back to work." He walked away, leaving the two students standing in the hallway, a mystery lingering between them, like an equation missing its final variable. Meanwhile, Victor Harper paced inside Principal Langford's office, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and simmering anger. "I told you, that janitor is no ordinary man. No one solves that problem by luck." Principal Langford removed her glasses and rubbed her temples. "Victor, I have a parent meeting in 10 minutes. Where exactly are you going with this?" "We have a disgraced academic fraud interacting with students. A former university professor accused of falsifying data. I've reviewed his employee file. There's nothing abnormal. He hasn't broken any rules by working here. No violations. That problem came from the International Math Olympiad 1997. Normal people don't just solve it." "What exactly is your issue, Victor?" Langford looked him square in the eye. "That he embarrassed you in front of your students? Or that you can't stand someone being better than you?" Victor clenched his fists. "I'll investigate. If the school won't act, I will." Langford nodded. "That's your choice. But keep it professional. No more public theatrics." That video already triggered 3 parent calls. Elsewhere, Lily was on the phone with her mother, Sandra Porter, a nurse and part-time public health student. "Mom, have you ever heard the name Thomas Gray? The janitor at your school?" "Yes. But I think, he used to be someone important. Did you ever study under him?" There was a pause. Then her mother's voice came, filled with surprise. "Professor Gray? Oh my God. I saw him lecture at a healthcare symposium over 15 years ago. A genius. He spoke math like people speak in conversation. But wasn't he accused of academic fraud?" "There were rumors, but no proof. The whistleblower was Dr. Leland Shaw. But the academic community was sharply divided back then." After the call, Lily opened her laptop and typed quickly. "Here it is," she told Mateo. "An article from 2004, mathematical prodigy accused of falsifying research data. No conclusive evidence. But the consequences were clear: funding pulled, hiring rejections, reputation ruined. The accuser was Dr. Shaw, his research partner. But Shaw never published anything else on that topic afterward. What if Gray was innocent?" Lily asked. "We might be able to find something others missed. And if he really did falsify data? Then we deserve to know the truth. Better than letting someone like Harper rewrite the story to suit himself." 3 days later, Principal Langford called Victor Harper into her office. On the desk was a thick folder. "I hear you've confirmed Mr. Gray's real identity. Once a brilliant professor, accused of fraud. The man we're paying to take out the trash. And your recommendation? We can't allow someone like him near our students." Langford raised an eyebrow. "He didn't lie on his application. No false identity. No deception. The position didn't even require a PhD. Still, he's a risk. Langford stood, meeting Victor's gaze calmly. Or is the real risk something else? Jealousy? A bruised ego? Or the truth that, sometimes, there are people greater than us, even if they're holding a mop? Victor had no answer. Are you really planning to ignore this? Victor Harper asked sharply, barely able to contain his agitation. What I'm planning, Principal Langford replied calmly but firmly, is to acknowledge that Thomas Gray has been an exemplary employee for the past 3 years. And I suggest you focus on teaching rather than hunting witches around this school. The words hit Victor's ambition like a bucket of ice water. But instead of backing down, they only fueled the fire of his wounded pride. That evening, in the quiet library under the cold glow of fluorescent lights, Thomas Gray was reshelving reference books when Mateo appeared from behind the stacks. Mr. Gray, can I ask you something, about math? Thomas looked up, eyes cautious. If it's about math, yes. If it's about anything else, I want no part of it. Mateo lowered his voice, glancing around. It's about Dr. Leland Shaw. Thomas froze. His usually calm eyes flared with alertness. What do you know about him? We found some links between him and Mr. Harper. They co-authored a funded research project back in 2000. Both names were on the paper. A flicker of complex emotion crossed Thomas's face, anger, bitterness, pain. This isn't something you kids should dig into, he said heavily. This is my life, my career, my name, all destroyed by a colleague who couldn't stand being outshone. So you really were innocent? Mateo asked. Thomas looked at him and replied slowly. The proofs in my paper were correct. My methods were unconventional, but entirely valid. But when doubt is planted by someone influential, truth becomes irrelevant. But if you could prove it again. It's been 15 years, Thomas cut in. The academic world has moved on. So have I. I don't want to return to a place that turned its back on me. Mateo tightened his grip on his backpack strap, his voice low. I've never lost everything like you have. But I know what it feels like to be dismissed. To be labeled just because of where I come from. And I know what it means to need someone to believe in you when the world turns away. Thomas was silent. Stay out of this, Mateo. Harper is looking for an excuse to take me down. I don't want you caught in it. Mateo nodded and slowly walked away, but the disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than any words. 2 weeks later. Wellington Academy's academic exhibition was approaching, an annual event to honor intellectual achievement, where students and teachers competed in mental challenges. This year, Victor Harper was organizing the program. In an empty classroom, Victor blocked Thomas's path. Gray, he said, standing in the doorway, eyes calculating. Just the man I was looking for. Thomas didn't stop, continuing to wipe the whiteboard. Mr. Harper, he said, his tone hollow. I still remember that problem you solved in the courtyard. Impressive. Thomas shrugged. I didn't do it to impress. Victor smirked. Then prove it. Join the academic exhibition. A math showdown, you and me. Let's see who really deserves to be heard. Thomas set down the cloth and turned. Not interested. Pity. The students are excited, especially young Ramirez. Seems like he trusts you more than his actual teacher. Thomas stared at Victor. I'm not anyone's teacher. Right. Just a janitor with a genius mind, Victor sneered. And a colorful past. So you know, Thomas said, expressionless. You think you can escape your past? I've got your file. I could send an anonymous email to the board titled, Why is a disgraced genius working among our students? Allegations, Thomas corrected, eyes locked on Victor's. I'm just presenting facts. How they're interpreted isn't my concern. Thomas didn't respond. But his face hardened. Victor leaned in. Either you accept the challenge, or start looking for a new restroom to clean. After Victor left, Thomas stood alone in the room. In the reflection of the glass door, he saw himself, not the young professor he once was, not just the janitor he had become. He was both, and more. A few minutes later, Mateo walked in without knocking. I heard about the challenge. Thomas nodded. So has the whole school, I'm sure. Are you going to accept? I haven't decided. You should, Mateo said, eyes shining. Not for revenge. To show the truth deserves to be heard. Thomas was silent. When I was labeled just a scholarship kid, you helped me reclaim my worth. Now it's your turn. Thomas lowered his head. Then spoke slowly. I once mentored a student named Jason Williams at Princeton. A natural-born talent. He's now teaching at MIT. You put your faith in the right place, Mateo said. I can't turn back time. But maybe I don't have to do this alone. You want me to join? Thomas smiled. I need a partner. A brave student. Someone who believes in himself, even when the world doesn't. Mateo's eyes lit up. I'm not sure I'm that good. Being good isn't about how much you know, Thomas said. It's about never stopping learning. Mateo nodded. Then he held out his hand. Thomas grasped it firmly. We won't let them define us by gossip and a distorted past. We'll rewrite the truth, Mateo said. News of Mateo becoming Thomas Gray's partner in the upcoming Wellington Academic Showcase spread through the school like a viral explosion. Within a single morning, every hallway, classroom, and even the cafeteria buzzed with chatter. A janitor and a scholarship student were going to face off against Victor Harper, the man dubbed the school's mathematical mastermind. Students immediately picked sides, half supported the underdogs, Thomas and Mateo, while the other half confidently placed their bets on Victor and his new partner, Bradley Lynn, the runner-up of the National Math Olympiad, sharp, confident, and with an ego bigger than his GPA. Lily wasted no time declaring herself campaign manager for Team Thomas. She created a social media account called Gray Matter to post updates, rally student support, and even designed a logo, a mop transforming into a pen drawing equations. Some teachers began showing quiet signs of favoritism toward Thomas. They didn't say anything, but the way they nodded or smiled at him in the hallway spoke volumes. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas and Mateo trained every afternoon in a small room behind the library, a private space quietly arranged by Principal Langford. The room was simple, 2 desks, a few old chairs, and a whiteboard. But to them, it was a world of their own, no prejudice, no past, only numbers and companionship. The key, Thomas said one late evening, doesn't lie in the formulas. It lies in perspective. Math isn't just about calculations, it's an art of connection. Mateo took notes silently, his eyes shining like a flashlight cutting through darkness. Why don't other teachers teach like you? He asked. Thomas smiled as he cleaned his glasses. Because not everyone knows how to turn knowledge into story. Some mathematicians are so brilliant, they forget that others aren't like them. And some don't care enough to try. What about your time at Princeton? I considered myself lucky to have both. I didn't teach because I had to, I taught because I loved it. Lily would occasionally drop by with sandwiches, juice, and encouragement, or sometimes, valuable intel. One night, she arrived with eyes sparkling like she had found a treasure map. I've got something, she said, pulling a folder from her backpack. Advanced math problems Victor has given over the past 5 years. Mateo gaped. Where did you get that? Lily shrugged. Call it, right place, right time. He left them on the desk while bragging to Mr. Robinson. I was quietly turning in my essay. Thomas skimmed through the papers. A slight crease formed between his brows. There's a clear pattern, he said. He favors complexity over clarity. Tricks over logic. That could be our advantage. From that day on, the strategy changed. Instead of memorizing definitions, they focused on grasping core concepts, learning to view math as an ecosystem, where everything connects and flows. The closer the showcase drew, the heavier the pressure became. Victor maintained his usual cool, but he never missed a chance to rattle Mateo in class. Asked to be on stage, now not sure how to land, he remarked one morning, layered in sarcasm. Mateo bit his lip but said nothing. He had learned from Thomas, true strength isn't in reaction, but in resilience. 3 days before the showcase, Thomas was reviewing notes when Principal Langford entered the room. "Mr. Gray," she said gently. "We need to talk." He nodded and closed his notebook. "I've been watching this unfold with more than just interest, with some concern." "I understand. If you feel this has gone too far." "No," she interrupted. "I'm concerned for you." Thomas raised an eyebrow. She continued. "I know about your past. My brother's a physics professor at Berkeley. He told me about what happened back then. And you still hired me?" "I didn't hire a disgraced professor," she smiled. "I hired a reliable, honest custodian with experience. But I'm not blind." She placed an envelope on the table. "You should read this. It arrived this morning. The sender was specific, it's for your eyes only." Thomas opened the envelope. Inside were printed emails, an exchange between Victor Harper and a familiar name, Dr. Leland Shaw. A line jumped out like lightning in the dark. "Of course it's correct. But the board doesn't understand half of what Gray writes. They listen to me, as expected." Another email, dated just weeks ago. "My old friend showed up at my school, mopping floors, no less." Shaw's response. "If you need him to stay in his proper place, just let me know." At the bottom was a handwritten note. "Not everyone can be fooled forever. Some of us have waited 15 years to make things right." Thomas felt his heart pound. His hands trembled as he folded the pages. After all these years, he had proof. Mateo walked in, grinning. "I came up with a few more nonlinear pattern problems. I think if we start with a spiral logic chain." He stopped at the look on Thomas's face. "What is it? Bad news?" Thomas shook his head, a slow smile forming, like the first crack in a wall long kept standing. "No. Quite the opposite. This may be what we've been waiting for." The Wellington Academic Showcase was closer than ever. And for the first time in many years, Thomas Gray no longer wanted to hide. The Wellington Academic Showcase had always been a platform for student-led projects in science, the arts, and innovation, but this year, it had transformed into the most anticipated intellectual showdown in the school's history, an unofficial duel between a proud teacher and a man once considered invisible by the entire academy. By mid-afternoon, Wellington's main auditorium was packed. Every seat was filled, students, teachers, parents, even a few local reporters who had caught wind of the challenge between a disgraced genius and the school's current academic titan. Behind the stage, in a narrow hallway draped with red velvet, Thomas Gray stood silently. In his coat pocket was an envelope containing printed emails, undeniable proof that Victor Harper and Dr. Shaw had conspired to destroy his career years ago. He had read them dozens of times. And still, he didn't know what to do. Reveal them? Burn them? Or hold on, as a final card? "Mr. Gray." Mateo approached, dressed in a neatly fitted shirt borrowed from his cousin, and for the first time, wearing a tie. Nervousness radiated from him. "We're fine," Thomas nodded, adjusting his collar, part of the new outfit Lily had convinced him to buy in place of his usual maintenance uniform. It felt strange, and yet, right. "We've prepared for everything," Mateo said, more to himself than anyone else. "They've got nothing we haven't seen before." Thomas placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Remember the most important part, don't solve to win, solve to understand. Everything else is just a bonus. Mr. Gray. Lily's voice rang out as she slipped through the backstage crowd, beaming. Half the school's wearing silver, Team Gray Mateo ribbons. I even set up a hashtag on the student portal. Thomas raised an eyebrow, amused and confused. Since when did academic showcases turn into sporting events? Since Victor Harper turned it into a power play, Lily winked. Oh, and a reporter wants to interview you after this, win or lose. Thomas shook his head, a small smirk forming. Let's just focus on the contest. Principal Langford approached, dressed in a sleek black blazer, her gaze sharper than usual. Gentlemen, are we ready? This is an academic showcase, stay professional, and if you can, make it unforgettable. The stage doors opened. Light poured in like a waterfall. The entire auditorium applauded as the 4 contestants stepped out, Victor Harper and Bradley Lynn to the right, Thomas Gray and Mateo Ramirez to the left. Victor stepped forward with a faint smirk. Mr. Gray, he nodded. Ready for your unexpected comeback? Good luck, Thomas replied, tone light. Victor scoffed. Luck has no place in mathematics. Only knowledge, and real experience. His eyes slid over to Mateo, laced with disdain. Interesting choice. Then again, maybe you didn't have anyone else. Mateo clenched his fists, but Thomas placed a calming hand on his shoulder, gaze steady. See you on the stage. The teams took their places. 2 desks were prepared on stage, each with whiteboards, markers, and calculators. In the center stood the problem podium, with a large screen behind to display the problems for all to see. 3 judges, all mathematics professors from top universities, sat on the left wing, their expressions sharp and observant. The lights dimmed. Principal Langford stepped to center stage, her voice echoing through the hall. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have the honor of witnessing a special feature, a mathematical challenge between 2 teams, representing 2 generations, 2 perspectives, and 1 shared pursuit, the truth behind the numbers. She introduced Victor and Bradley first, listing national titles, international accolades, drawing respectful nods from the audience. Then she turned to the left. And today's challengers, Thomas Gray, known to many as Wellington's maintenance staff, but once a respected mathematical researcher. Alongside him is 11th grader Mateo Ramirez, a name that's caught the attention of our entire math department. The applause swelled, not just polite, but sincere. A few cheers erupted from the upper rows, where Lily led the unofficial cheering squad. The rules are simple, Langford continued. 3 rounds of increasing difficulty. Scoring is based not only on the correct answer but also on clarity, reasoning, and teamwork. Round 1 appeared on screen, a triple integral involving spherical coordinate transformations, constrained by a second-order derivative condition. The auditorium fell silent. Victor and Bradley launched into action. Their pens moved fast and forcefully, coordinating as if reading each other's minds. On the other side, Thomas and Mateo remained calm. Thomas leaned in and whispered. Start with the coordinate transformation. Remember Tuesday's drill? Mateo nodded, sketching the new axis system. He moved slowly but surely, and gradually, the solution began to unfold, like a complex but fluid piece of music. 2 minutes before time, Victor stepped back, smugly scanning their opponents. Thomas and Mateo kept writing. 30 seconds left. Mateo nodded, stepped back, and took a deep breath. The judges examined the whiteboards. Their eyes passed over every calculation, every symbol. Then one professor stood. Both teams presented correct solutions. However, the auditorium held its breath. Team Gray Ramirez displayed a systematic, clearly structured solution, guiding the reader through each logical step. That's a rare quality. Round 1 score, tie. Applause broke out, this time, heavier from the left side. Victor turned away, but couldn't hide a furrow in his brow. Thomas only shrugged slightly, glancing at Mateo, who was doing his best not to smile too wide. And this was only the first round. The first round ended, and although Victor Harper kept a calm expression, his smile twisted slightly, like a scratch across a mirror. No one said anything, but everyone saw it. He was no longer untouchable. Now came round 2. The new problem lit up on the large screen, a complex proof in general number theory, presented through contrapositive logic and layers of abstract reasoning. Few high school students had ever approached such topics. This was the domain of advanced mathematics undergraduates. As soon as the symbols appeared, murmurs spread through the auditorium. Worried glances, hushed whispers. This is college-level math, isn't it? Victor still looked confident. He and Bradley dove into writing right away. But something had changed. Maybe it was the pressure from round 1, or the growing weight of all those eyes watching. Their synergy began to crack. Bradley wrote a portion and stopped. Victor erased it. They started over. And again. Meanwhile, across the stage, Thomas Gray didn't reach for his marker right away. He stood, hands clasped, eyes scanning the problem, then turned to Mateo. We won't start from the hypothesis. Then from where? From the conclusion. Let it lead us to the question. The entire audience watched intently. A 10th grader whispered. Are they solving the problem backwards? But as time passed, something strange happened. While Victor and Bradley fumbled through convoluted transformations, Thomas's team began building a framework, clear, logical steps forming like the foundation of a house, not a hastily built shelter. Thomas let Mateo write. And for the first time, the boy truly shined. Each step, each definition, each movement of his pen carried confidence and logic. They finished with 3 minutes to spare. Calmly, they stepped back. When the clock struck 0, Victor's board was covered in erasures. Though their answer was technically correct, it was messy and unclear. Meanwhile, Thomas's board was clean, concise, and most importantly, beautiful. The judges whispered among themselves, then announced the result. Round 2, Team Gray Ramirez scored higher. A brief silence. Then. Applause. The clapping began from the student section, swelling, spreading, until it became an undeniable wave. The underdogs were now in the lead. Victor stared at the scoreboard. He leaned toward Bradley and muttered something. The student nodded slightly, face tense. The final round, teacher's choice. By tradition, the third round allowed each lead teacher to submit their own challenge. Victor stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope, a thin smile across his lips. I've prepared something special, he said into the mic, a problem in the field of chaotic systems, where math is no longer about simple numbers, but the delicate dance between order and disorder. Thomas froze. The moment he heard chaotic systems, he knew. This wasn't random. It was an attack. A personal one, hidden under academic guise. This exact field, the subject of the scandalous paper from years ago, was what had pushed him out of academia. The problem appeared, nonlinear differential equations, twisted boundary conditions, and a demand to prove convergence under instability. The auditorium held its breath. Thomas looked at the board. His hand tightened. Memories came rushing in, suspicious eyes, cold hearings, colleagues turning their backs, trust shattered overnight. He stood still, frozen. Mr. Gray. Mateo's voice pulled him back. Where do we start? The main equation, or the boundary? Thomas turned to him. In Mateo's eyes, there was no doubt, only trust. A trust that asked for nothing but presence. He smiled, soft as a breeze after a storm. Neither. Let's start by understanding what the problem wants us to see. Instead of rushing to the board, Thomas began explaining, his voice steady, as if teaching. Chaos theory makes you think everything is random. But really, it follows deeper rules we just don't see at first glance. Like weather patterns? Mateo asked, remembering. Exactly. That's why we can't predict the weather past 3 days, but we can observe trends in the long term. His voice was steady, certain, and captivating. Not just Mateo, but the whole auditorium, even the judges, leaned in to listen. Meanwhile, Victor and Bradley were hunched over calculations. They didn't listen. They didn't feel. Midway through, Mateo spotted something. Look here. If we rotate the boundary condition and reframe it through linearization. Thomas paused, eyes lighting up. Yes. You're not just solving, you're understanding. They wrote together. During this, Victor started glancing over. His expression changed, concern, then frustration. 5 minutes remained. Thomas and Mateo finished. They stood quietly. Victor, agitated, erased a section of their solution, tossed the marker aside, then stepped up to the mic, even though it wasn't his turn. Before we wrap up, his voice rang cold and hard, I think everyone here should know the real context. Principal Langford frowned and moved forward, but Victor pressed on. Mr. Barnes, sorry, Professor Elliot Barnes, was once a lecturer at Princeton. But he didn't leave for personal reasons. He was accused of academic fraud. In this exact field. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Victor turned, triumphant. Thomas said nothing. Slowly, he pulled the envelope from his pocket and stepped up to the mic. Yes, he said. I was a professor. I was accused. He held the papers up to the stage light. And these are the emails that show who orchestrated that accusation. Not just then, but again, here today. Stunned silence. Victor turned pale. Langford stepped up, took the documents, flipping through quickly. Thomas turned to Mateo. Now you understand. Victory isn't about defeating others. It's about overcoming the fear inside ourselves. A silent shockwave rippled through the auditorium like a tsunami. No one said a word, but the air was thick, like the stillness before a great storm. Every eye was fixed on Thomas Gray, the man standing at the whiteboard, marker hovering in hand, spine straight as if frozen in place. Your paper on chaotic systems was retracted by the very journal that published it, Victor Harper continued triumphantly. Your career ended in disgrace and doubt. He turned to face the judges, arms outstretched like an actor on stage. These are verifiable facts. I believe they are, relevant to the context of today's competition. Silence. Mateo glanced at Thomas, eyes silently asking, is it true? In the middle rows, Lily shot to her feet, eyes glittering with anger and injustice. Principal Langford stepped toward the mic, but Thomas was already walking forward, his steps slow but firm. Each footfall seemed to shatter the silence in the room. Mr. Harper is correct, Thomas began, his voice not loud but perfectly clear. I was once a professor of mathematics. And yes, my academic career was shattered by an accusation. He paused, pulled a thick envelope from the inside of his coat, sealed with the red stamp of an old academic journal. He held it aloft like a verdict. What Mr. Harper didn't say was that the accusation came from his own mentor, Dr. Leland Shaw. A man who once claimed that my mathematical approach threatened the stability of the traditional research school. Victor's face paled. His hands clenched unconsciously. That's a serious accusation, he hissed through his teeth. It is, Thomas nodded. Unlike the accusation against me, I have evidence. He opened the envelope, pulling out printed emails clearly marked with verified digital signatures. Emails between you and Shaw, where you discussed fabricating evidence to discredit me. Even your recent exchanges, just weeks ago, when I, by pure coincidence, showed up at this school, as a janitor. Gasps erupted. Shocked whispers filled the air. A teacher in the front row shook their head in disbelief. Victor stepped forward as if to snatch the documents, but Thomas calmly stepped back. Don't worry. I'm not here to trade dignity for revenge. He turned to Mateo, his eyes suddenly soft. We came here to solve a problem. So let's get back to that. He returned to the whiteboard, picked up the marker, as if nothing had happened. Ready, Mateo? Mateo hesitated only a second, then nodded. He gripped his pen, palm slightly damp with sweat, but his gaze was steady with resolve. They returned to their work, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. And Victor stood still, cast aside from the center of the very drama he created. The result. When time expired, the judges deliberated briefly, but their expressions said plenty. Victor and Bradley's solution was technically correct. But Thomas and Mateo's was a journey. Clear, elegant, and full of authentic creative thought. Especially the presentation, where Thomas explained chaos theory to the entire hall, earned approving nods from the judges. The result was announced, Team Gray Ramirez won the entire competition. Applause thundered like a storm. Students rushed the stage, surrounding them, not just because of the victory, but because of what they represented: belief, justice, and second chances. Victor and Bradley left the stage quietly. No one tried to stop them. After the spotlight. After the ceremony ended, Thomas stood beside Mateo, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder, letting the light fall on his student. Reporters swarmed them, but he only said one thing. This win isn't mine alone. Mateo didn't just keep up, he was the one who spotted the critical link in the solution. Principal Langford pulled him aside. Those documents, you're certain? I've verified everything. Digital signatures, timestamps, IP addresses, indisputable. The board will need to launch a formal investigation. This could shake the whole system. I understand. She looked at him for a long time. Then asked. After all these years of staying away, was it worth it? Thomas looked around. Mateo was being congratulated by classmates. Nearby, Lily was passionately explaining chaotic equations to curious parents. He smiled. Yes. Every second of it. Days later. Westbridge was shaken. Victor was suspended. A formal investigation began. The press picked up the story: disgraced janitor proves innocence with math after 15 years. Universities began calling. A journal that had once published, then retracted, Thomas's paper sent an official apology. Princeton reopened his case file. But Thomas still came to school every morning, made coffee, straightened chairs in the library, and scribbled equations on the whiteboard before students arrived. Until one afternoon, Lily knocked on the maintenance room door, this time, not to print an essay. Someone wants to meet you. In the principal's office, a woman stood. Stern eyes, silver hair tied neatly, holding a copy of the International Journal of Mathematics. I'm Gabriella Reynolds. Investigative journalist. Your story is the shockwave the academic world has waited 15 years for. She paused, looking him directly in the eye. But what interests me most isn't what's past. It's what comes next. Thomas looked down at his hands, hands that once drew grand equations, and later wiped thousands of floors. He looked up, eyes sharp. I don't know, he replied. But this time. I won't walk away. Your case is a vivid loophole in how universities handle allegations of academic misconduct, Gabriella Reynolds said, her sharp gaze fixed on Elliot. A painful example of how a person can lose their entire career because of unverified suspicion. She paused for a moment, then leaned forward, her voice weighty. Your story could help prevent this from happening to someone else. Deshawn, who had been silent until now, spoke up, softly but firmly. That's what I've been saying from the beginning. This isn't just your story anymore. Elliot looked at them both silently. Years of living in silence, in fear of being exposed, were now being dragged into the light. He clenched his hands gently, then nodded. I agree. But let me be clear, this is not a journey of revenge. My goal is still the same, the truth. And if that helps others, even better. The interview lasted 2 hours, like reopening a wound that had long scarred over on the outside but still throbbed quietly within. Elliot spoke, his voice low but steady, about the promising research paper, the suspicious looks from colleagues who had once congratulated him, the invisible accusation that became a sledgehammer, and how he quietly withdrew from the academic world. These emails between Graves and Harper are the still smoking gun, Gabriella said, flipping through the printed copies he had provided. I only have one question, how did you get these? They were sent to me anonymously, Elliot replied, his eyes still as a deep lake. I still don't know who sent them. Maybe, an old friend with a conscience. What about Victor Harper? Principal Langford, who had been silent since the meeting began, finally spoke. Mr. Harper has been suspended pending a full investigation. The school board is taking this matter very seriously. They should, Gabriella nodded. If verified, this could be the continuation of a decade-long academic conspiracy. She jotted a few notes, then looked up. What's your next step, Mr. Gray? Are you going back to teaching? Elliot didn't respond immediately. Though he had thought about it, he had never truly imagined himself standing before a classroom again, the person he used to be, before everything fell apart. I'm not sure yet, he admitted. Maybe it's still too soon. Principal Langford interjected. There's an official offer on your desk from the school board. We'd like you to teach at Wellington, formally. Deshawn turned to him, eyes bright like a flame. Really? You'll be a teacher again? I'm considering it, Elliot said with a soft smile. What's there to consider? You were born to be in the classroom. Teaching isn't like cleaning floors, Elliot said, his voice tinged with a quiet fear. It doesn't let you hide. It demands that you be truly yourself. And I'm not sure I'm still that person. Then who are you, if not Professor Gray? Lily asked gently. Before Elliot could answer, his phone buzzed. A short message. He read it. Then froze. A call followed immediately. Elliot stepped outside, leaving behind a room full of expectant eyes. 10 minutes later, he returned. His eyes were red, not from sadness, but from a feeling difficult to name. It was Jason Williams, he said, his voice choked. My former student at Princeton. He's now an associate professor at MIT. The one you told us about? Deshawn asked. Elliot nodded. He saw the news about the showcase. He said, he's been looking for me for the past 10 years. A silence fell like the blink of an eye. He never believed the accusations. He tried to defend me, but I disappeared. And now he's back. Lily asked. To thank me, Elliot replied, his voice trembling slightly. Because I believed in him when no one else did. He said I changed his life. And he wants to bring his entire research team here. To see me again. The room fell completely silent, no one laughed, no one spoke. Only a deep sense of respect filled the space. In the days that followed, Gabriella left Wellington with detailed notes and a newfound respect for a man forgotten for over a decade. She promised to turn the story into a full investigative series, to raise a critical question: are we protecting justice, or killing talent with suspicion? Principal Langford returned to her desk, but not without leaving one last message. The classroom is waiting for you. You don't have to be Professor Gray. Just be yourself. And then, slowly, everything began to change. Victor Harper submitted his resignation before the investigation concluded. News outlets reported non-stop. Academic journals began publishing articles on the Gray phenomenon, a brilliant mind buried under prejudice. But the most profound change wasn't in the headlines. It was in Wellington's hallways, where students began greeting the maintenance staff by name. Where a once quiet student like Mateo now stood before class, presenting on chaotic systems. Where Lily expanded her documentary project into a school-wide awareness campaign on the invisibility of hidden talent. And in a quiet corner of the library, where Elliot still sat reading every lunch break, there was always at least one student asking him for help. "Professor Barnes," Jason Williams said, his voice both emotional and full of reverence, "I still can't believe I found you." Elliot looked up from his new teacher's desk. For a brief moment, he saw an image of Jason from 15 years ago, a sophomore with defiant eyes and endless questions. And now, standing before him was a grown man in a crisp shirt, holding a folder and an old leather backpack. On his collar was a small tag, Associate Professor, MIT. Elliot stood up, said nothing, and simply opened his arms, embracing his former student as though no time had passed between them. "I didn't think you'd find me here," he said, his eyes still red with emotion. "When Reynolds' article came out, I stayed up all night reading it. I always believed you were innocent." "Always," Jason said, pulling out a stack of documents. "These are scans of the letters you sent me during my freshman year. I kept every one. What you wrote changed my life." Elliot looked at each printed letter, recognizing his own slanted handwriting. He remembered the sleepless nights editing Jason's essays, the times he defended him against the department's conservative professors. What once felt like the duty of a teacher had turned out to be the seed of a future. "You didn't need to come here just to thank me, Jason," Elliot smiled. "I didn't come just to thank you," Jason said seriously. "I came to invite you." "Invite me?" Jason opened his backpack and took out a folder. "I want you to join my research group on applied mathematics and chaotic systems at MIT, as an academic advisor. You don't need to leave Westbridge. We'll send over papers, materials, and host regular virtual seminars." Elliot paused. An invitation from the very school that had once shut him out after his fall, now offered not by a board of trustees, but by a student who used to sit in the back row, a student he once pulled from the mire of self-doubt. "MIT doesn't worry about my past." "No," Jason replied. "We've learned from it." The response left Elliot speechless. "I'll consider it," he said at last, but in his voice was the light of a man finally stepping out of a long, dark tunnel. Jason nodded. He didn't need anything more. Consider it, from Elliot Barnes that day was already a silent yes. A few weeks later. On an early summer day, Elliot's classroom hummed with his steady teaching voice. On the board were nonlinear systems of equations. In the front row, Deshawn sat attentively, taking notes, while Lily stood at the corner filming for her documentary, The Return of a Teacher. When the bell rang, most students rushed out, but a small group stayed behind. They wanted to ask more, to understand deeper, to hear Professor Barnes explore another variation of the problem. Elliot didn't send them away. He pulled up a chair and continued with them. The classroom door opened. Principal Walsh stepped in, carrying 2 envelopes, one, an invitation to speak at the National Education Conference, the other, from Princeton, a formal apology, accompanied by an offer for a guest lectureship. Elliot held the 2 envelopes, stared at them for a long time, then set them down. "I'll think about it," he said again, but this time, with a genuine smile on his face. At last, a quiet afternoon. Elliot stood alone at the front of an empty classroom. No students. No cameras. No spotlight. Just him and the blackboard. He wrote a simple sentence. Everyone deserves a second chance, and someone brave enough to give it. Then he set the chalk down. He said nothing more. Outside the window, red flame tree blossoms began to fall. Summer had come. Everything was about to change. But this time, he would not retreat. Because he was a teacher. And finally, he was back where he belonged. Deshawn looked up, his eyes filled with worry and self-doubt, a familiar feeling to anyone who's ever had to prove they deserved a place, step by step. "So, you think I should go?" Elliot didn't answer right away. He looked at his student and saw not just a young man with talent, but a soul standing at a crossroads, between a past of scarcity and a future full of promise. "I don't think," Elliot said, his voice soft but unwavering. "I know you should go." Jason stood quietly nearby, not interrupting. This was a moment for the two of them, teacher and student, no longer defined by titles, circumstances, or the judgment of others. Just one who had once been guided, now witnessing his teacher doing the same for the next generation. Deshawn lowered his head. When he looked up again, his eyes had changed, no longer uncertain, but filled with determination. "I'll go. I'll take everything I learned here with me, from you, from Lily, from everything we built together." He turned to Jason and extended his hand. "Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Williams. I won't waste it." Jason shook his hand tighter than necessary, as if sending a promise through the gesture. "I have no doubt about that, Deshawn." 1 week later. Before Deshawn left Westbridge for MIT, the school held a small farewell gathering, unofficial, unpretentious, but deeply moving. Teachers who once ignored him, students who once overlooked him, now came to congratulate him, not just for the achievement, but for what he represented, a real shift in how the school valued its people. Lily, unsurprisingly, organized the whole thing. She played a short video, clips from the showcase, behind-the-scenes training, and small, quiet moments between Elliot and Deshawn. One moment silenced the entire room, Elliot's words during one practice session. "A person doesn't have to stand out to have worth. They just need someone to see that worth, and not let go." After the event, when only a few remained in the old classroom, Deshawn hugged Elliot tightly. "Thank you for not letting go." Elliot placed a hand on his shoulder. "I didn't let go because you never gave me a reason to." Then they parted ways, not with promises, not with vows, just a nod, like two men who understood they'd see each other again. In a new form, in a new chapter. That fall, the Westbridge Mentorship program launched. Elliot, now officially Professor Barnes, stood before the first group of students in the program. Each had their own story, their own background, but one thing in common: underestimated, misunderstood, overlooked. He began the orientation with his own story. Not to gain sympathy or admiration, but to say, "I understand. I'm not here to teach you how to succeed," he said. "I'm here to help you believe that success is possible, because when you believe in yourself, limits become nothing more than assumptions." The students sat quietly, listening. And in their eyes, perhaps for the first time, was a flicker of belief. At MIT, Deshawn stood in a grand lecture hall. He held in his hands the first assignment of the summer program. It was hard. Pressured. But instead of fear, he smiled. Because he was used to this, used to standing in places no one thought he belonged, and proving them wrong. He opened his notebook, picked up his pen, and began to write. Back at Westbridge, Elliot Barnes stood at the familiar blackboard. Today's lesson was about chaos theory. But before he began, he wrote one line on the board. "A good teacher doesn't teach answers, they teach students never to stop asking questions." Outside the window, autumn was arriving. Leaves had begun to fall. A new chapter was unfolding. Not a return, but a continuation. As the applause rang out, Elliot stepped back from the lectern, his heart pounding, not with nerves, but with something far deeper, a sense of wholeness. On stage, Deshawn stepped forward, adjusting the microphone with the calm confidence of someone who had finally found his place in the world. The vest he wore couldn't hide the ink stains on his fingers, marks from countless sleepless nights spent with books, equations, and notes he had written for students in the mentoring program. "I'm not a perfect person," Deshawn began, his voice steady and grounded. "I've doubted myself, felt like I didn't belong here. But then someone saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. And instead of turning away, he chose to step toward me." He turned to Elliot, a genuine smile forming on his face. "Professor Barnes gave me a second chance. And through that, he taught me the greatest lesson: that the most powerful thing a person can do, is create space for someone else to become great. The entire hall rose to their feet in applause. But Elliot didn't move. He sat still, a quiet wave crashing inside his chest, not pride, but peace. A feeling he hadn't known in a very long time. The following June, Lily's documentary, Beyond the Uniform, won an award at a National Student Film Festival and was selected to screen at an educational TEDx event in Boston. The film, narrated by Lily and featuring the often overlooked figures of a school, from the librarian to the bus driver, not only illuminated Elliot's story but redrew the map of success, no longer just test scores or accolades, but courage, resilience, and humanity. Lily received a full scholarship to study communications, and in her graduation speech, she said, "Professor Barnes wasn't the main character in my film. The real lead was the power of listening and belief, two things that changed my life." Autumn. The sign next to a new office at Westbridge read, "Professor Elliot Barnes, Director of the Mentorship Program. We don't measure intelligence by scores, but by how you choose to see the world." Elliot stepped in, adjusting the arrangement of a few old math books on the shelf. One he placed apart, A Brief History of Time, an old, worn copy that had followed him from the library long ago, to a cold maintenance room in the basement, and now to a place of honor on his shelf. On his desk was a stack of letters from new students preparing to join the mentorship program's second year. Elliot opened one. A line of handwritten words appeared. "I never thought I could get into Westbridge. I never thought I was smart. But I read the article about you, and I thought, maybe I'm worth someone believing in too." Elliot folded the letter gently and set it on the desk. At an age when most think of retiring, he felt as if he were just beginning. Many years later, a university auditorium was packed. A middle-aged man with slim glasses and a modest smile stood at the podium. On the slide behind him, Global Inspiration Award, Professor Deshawn Carter. He shared his journey, from a scholarship student once dismissed by many to a leading mathematician influencing generations of students around the world. "If there's one person I must thank for changing my life," he said, his voice catching for a moment, "it's the one who didn't see my grades, my skin color, or my background, but saw me as a seed not yet grown. He watered it, waited patiently, and believed I would rise." On the screen appeared a black and white photo of an older man, dignified and kind-eyed, Professor Elliot Barnes. The applause thundered on and on. The final reflection. In an old notebook, Elliot had once written, "If no one sees your worth, don't worry. Be the first to see it in someone else." It wasn't just a life philosophy. It was how he saved his own life. And then, how he saved so many others. Elliot looked up from the file in his hands, squinting at Principal Walsh as if to make sure he had heard correctly. "Graves is giving a speech, on academic ethics," he asked, his voice soft as wind, but tinged with something that had just evaporated inside him. "The official theme is, transparency and justice in research evaluation," she replied, with a look that blended anger, sarcasm, and genuine disbelief. A brief silence fell, then Elliot gently placed the file down on the desk. "I think I'll attend that conference," he said slowly. "I thought you might," Walsh smiled. "The Westbridge board will fund the full trip if you agree to speak, not to rebut, just to share a perspective from personal experience." Elliot nodded faintly, then looked again toward the window. Outside, the schoolyard was nearly empty, with only the wind and the last leaves of spring drifting across the sun-faded grass. 1 month later, National Education Conference, Boston. The main auditorium glowed with soft white light. On stage, Dr. Martin Graves delivered an assertive talk on how trust between students and faculty is the cornerstone of a healthy academic environment. He wore a gray suit, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed, and his face calm with unwavering confidence. In the audience, Elliot Barnes sat quietly, hands interlocked. He hadn't come to rebut. He had come to witness. When Graves stepped down to polite applause, Westbridge's principal took the stage to introduce the next speaker. Our next speaker has lived through one of academia's harshest lessons in ethics. But he's not here to retell others' mistakes, he's here to share a story of restoration, recognition, and the power of belief. Professor Elliot Barnes. The entire room fell silent. Elliot walked to the podium, steady and calm. When he saw Martin Graves sitting in the front row, his face showed no resentment, only the composure of someone who has walked through fire and come out whole. "I once lost everything because of an accusation that was never proven," Elliot began. "For a time, I thought reputation was the most valuable thing I had. But it turns out, what's truly irreplaceable is the ability to believe in yourself, when no one else will." He spoke of his journey at Westbridge, of students like Deshawn, of Lily, of the mentorship program. His voice held no bitterness, no sting, only the smooth, unwavering rhythm of truth. "I'm not telling this story to reclaim justice," Elliot concluded. "Justice isn't about rewriting the past. It's about creating a future where those same mistakes cannot happen again." As he stepped away from the podium, the applause this time wasn't merely polite, it was genuine. People stood. A voice from the back called out, "Thank you." And from the front row, Martin Graves did not stand, but his eyes dropped. A truth had been acknowledged, not in words, but in silence. 3 months later, Westbridge. The new school year opened with more ceremony than usual. Beside the school flag was a newly carved emblem, a bird taking flight from a small box, beneath it, the inscription, "There is no greatness like seeing potential in another." In his new office, titled Director of Academic Innovation, Elliot Barnes quietly reviewed proposals for the upcoming year, an expanded mentorship program, unconscious bias training for staff, a multi-school STEM collaboration with nearby public schools. There was a knock at the door. Henry Jenkins entered, his jacket bearing a few paint smudges. "Professor Barnes, I just wanted to let you know, my first organic chemistry class today had 3 students stay after, voluntarily," he smiled. One of them said, "She wants to be a pharmaceutical researcher." "That's a start," Elliot replied, his eyes lighting with genuine joy. "Thank you," Henry said. "For seeing something I didn't dare believe I still had." Elliot simply smiled and nodded. Later that day, in the old basement room, once a quiet lunch retreat, Elliot opened a small wooden cabinet. Inside were the old mop, the rusted bucket, and a chalkboard with a message he had written long ago. "Only when we dare to look at what's been forgotten, do we find the real treasure." He took a cloth and wiped the dust from the board. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder. Closing words. Professor Elliot Barnes was no longer the anonymous man pushing a cleaning cart down school hallways. He was a sower of seeds. A man who taught a generation that beneath the simplest uniform may shine the brilliance of a mind. And within every person, no matter how underestimated, there lies a possibility, a spark, waiting to be seen. After the conversation with Principal Walsh, Elliot Barnes sat quietly in his office. His hands rested lightly on a stack of student files, the late afternoon sunlight stretching across the desk in a long beam, shining through the worn frame of his old black glasses. The upcoming event, the academic conference where he might face Martin Graves directly, lingered in his mind like an unsolved equation. Not because he was still afraid, but because he understood, no appearance on that stage would ever be personal. Even if he were merely sharing his own experience, every word would carry weight, not just for himself, but for all those ever wounded by rushed judgments. He glanced toward the whiteboard, where students often left end-of-year notes. One line, neatly written in red marker, stood out. "Thank you for seeing me, even when I couldn't yet see myself. M.D." Elliot smiled faintly. He immediately knew it was from Maria Diaz. Ever since the note he had left on her test, Maria had changed in surprising ways. She had joined the mentorship orientation, emailed for extra reading materials, and, for the first time, raised her hand in class to share an approach to solving differential equations that had even caught him off guard. Elliot suddenly recalled an old conversation with a colleague at Princeton, someone who had once asked why he was so patient with struggling students. Back then, he had only replied, "Because no one should go through life without being properly seen at least once." Perhaps because he had almost been that person himself. He left his office, walking slowly through empty hallways, running his fingers along the edge of summer bulletin boards yet to be taken down. Reaching the door of the old maintenance room, once his sanctuary, he paused and turned the knob. It was still unlocked. Inside, Henry Jenkins was carefully wiping down a lawn mower. "Didn't think you'd stop by here again," Henry said without turning around. "Sometimes I need to remember where I came from," Elliot replied with a soft chuckle. Henry looked up and handed Elliot a cloth. "Give me a hand." "For old time's sake." Elliot took it, kneeling to wipe the dust-caked blades underneath. "Heard the students like your chemistry class." "I'm surprised I still remember how to teach," Henry nodded. "Maybe it's just needing someone to believe I could." "I know that feeling very well," Elliot said, his gaze distant. 2 weeks later, National Education Conference, New York. Elliot Barnes stood behind the curtain, adjusting the small microphone clipped to his collar. In front of him lay a grand stage, lights casting a soft glow over an audience of more than 500, professors, principals, and researchers from across the country. Dr. Martin Graves had just concluded his 40-minute keynote on research ethics and faculty responsibility. Polished as ever, full of elegant deflection and strategic vagueness, but to Elliot, now it all sounded like a fading echo from a bygone era. When his name was called, Elliot walked onto the stage, composed and calm. No longer someone who avoided the spotlight, but someone who accepted it, as part of a greater purpose. "I didn't come here to rebut," Elliot began. "I came to tell a story. Not about pain, but about survival, and healing." He spoke about the years of exile. About janitorial work. About the first time a student asked him, "You know calculus," as if it were the most important question ever posed. We live in a system where one accusation can outweigh a lifetime of research. But worse than that, is a system that makes the wounded believe they no longer deserve to return. "I'm not here to restore a reputation. I'm here because I don't want any student, teacher, or researcher to go through what I did, silently, alone, with no one on their side." When Elliot left the stage, there was no thunderous ovation, just a moment of complete stillness, followed by a slow but resonant applause. Martin Graves said nothing, but he stood and exited the hall shortly after. 1 month later. Outside Elliot's office at Westbridge was a new plaque. Barnes Carter Center for Academic Potential Development. No one is forgotten. Every potential deserves to be seen. Inside, Maria Diaz was guiding 3 freshmen through reverse integration techniques. Lily had just received news that her documentary had been nominated at an international film festival. Deshawn, on break from MIT, had sent in a short math tutorial, now playing on a big screen in the hallway. And Elliot, standing in the corner of the room, was scribbling notes on a proposal to expand the program, this time, to include students from nearby public schools. A small student knocked on the door, shyly asking, "Professor Barnes, I heard, if you think you're good at something, you can apply for the mentorship program?" Elliot bent down, smiling gently. "What subject do you think you're good at?" The girl whispered. "I'm not sure yet. But I think I could be, if someone believed in me." Elliot nodded and pulled out a form. "Then you've come to the right place." The final message of the story. We are not only defined by our past, but by how we lift others when they are just beginning. And sometimes, a single act of belief, given at the right time, can become the light that leads someone through their entire life.